We move on to another story. A new coalition of activists is working to end the death penalty here in the United States. The organization, called 20 Million Strong, points out that the racial disparities in the criminal justice system, among other problems, according to the group, 90 million Americans oppose capital punishment, and they're ready to find their collective voice. Diann Rust-Tierney is executive director of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. Diann, welcome to Arise America. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I really do appreciate it. So can you sort of describe to me how you see race as an issue or racial bias as an issue when it comes to the death penalty?
Well, as we've talked about and as you've alluded to in our earlier stories tonight, we're in the midst of a real conversation in this country about race, whether we have a colorblind criminal justice system. And I think in that kind of a setting, we simply can't have a punishment as severe and irreversible as the death penalty. Because if race is infecting the system, we can't have a good result. And that's what we've seen. You know, we've had a number of exonerations this past year. And what we're seeing is that there's a correlation between guilty people going free and innocent people being sentenced to death and race. That if you look at the majority of people who've been released from death row because of innocence, you see that a significant number of people are people of color. And so there is a correlation between race and the death penalty. There's also a correlation between how the system values victims. You know, overwhelmingly, the death penalty has been used when the victim of a crime is white. Even though about half of homicide victims are people of color. Something like 75 to 80% of the people who've been executed have been executed for the murders of white victims. And so we don't have a system of justice that any of us now have confidence really operates in a fair and neutral and colorblind fashion. And so now we say we simply can't continue with the death penalty.
And so tell me more about the 90 Million Strong effort and what you hope to achieve.
Absolutely. The 90 Million Strong campaign is a campaign that we launched this year to bring together all the many Americans who know that the death penalty is wrong or unfair and know that it's time to end. What we want to do is really give voice to people from all walks of life, from all political perspectives, who've come to understand that the death penalty doesn't work. And we want to enhance that voice and get more and more people engaged in raising public awareness and talking to policymakers. And we think now is the time to do this. We've had an extraordinary year with the number of botched executions. We've seen extraordinary examples of the system going very wrong, with prisoners dying after 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 2 hours, gasping for air. We've seen, you know, as I said, a record number of exonerations, and many of which have elements of race in the mistakes that were made. And so now is the time for the millions of Americans to stand up and say, this is wrong. We can go in other directions. We can move this country forward. And so we think it's an opportune time. And we think if we get more people engaged, that we will really change people's view on this issue and we'll get rid of the death penalty.
Well, you know, in spite of what you're saying, Diann, the death penalty still enjoys a fairly high bit of support in public polling. What do you make of that? Even though in the news there have been all these stories that you just alluded to of botched executions as well as exonerations.
Well, one of the things that we know about the support for the death penalty is that it's a mile wide and an inch deep. And that means that people support the death penalty in the abstract, but when they actually look at how it operates in practice, they don't support it. And so that's why, although 60-some% of the public thinks that the death penalty might be okay in theory, when they're actually confronted with the opportunity to impose a death sentence, or when they have other alternatives, they don't choose it. At the same time that you see that public opinion poll, you also see that the death penalty really isn't used. It's in a handful of states and a handful of jurisdictions within those states. And so the death penalty really is dying of its own volition. It's falling under its own weight. And so what we have is the death penalty in a few places, and where it remains, it's the most extreme. That's where we see the experimentation with prisoners and these botched executions. It's where we're seeing the risk of innocent people being executed. And so public opinion with regard to the death penalty isn't something that doesn't change, and that's what this campaign is all about. If we get more people involved and more people engaged in conversations, we like to say the more people know about the death penalty, the more they like it. And this campaign is really enlisting more people in the effort to educate the public.
All right, well, you've made more people aware today. Diann Rust-Tierney, thank you so much. It was good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
And you're watching Arise America.